Whoa, Nelly. It's just Mark on his own in an interview special. Hey guys, we got someone joining us on the show today. We're about to meet them in just a minute. It's a beautiful day to have a guest. Time to talk to one of the best. Is it Larry? Could it be Larry? We've had Tom Scioli, Shannon Gallant, Andy Wardman was a gent, Mike Mailar, Word Burglar. We've always wanted to have a guest just like you, like the Queen will ask, and what do you do? So let's make the most of this communique. Sorry to say it is for no pay. I won't lie, we will try. Won't you do me a favour? Don't you tease with some expertise. Let's interview a creator. So it's Mark here. You thought that might be the end of it for the interview specials, but don't dream it's over. It's a crowded house here today, because with me today is Tim Finn, the guy who, everywhere he goes, he always brings his Joes with him. Tim Finn is currently writing the definitive history of the Real American Hero incarnation of G.I. Joe and documenting his progress at realamericanbook.com. Tim teaches animation history and drawing at Lesley Art and Design, and also owns Hub Comics in Somerville, Massachusetts. And I'm delighted to welcome him onto the show today. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me, and hello to the Talking Joe's listeners.
It's great to have you on, because I've been long reading your blog and sort of seeing the goings on as your book is progressing, and you sort of sharing some of the tidbits from it. So I've been fascinated by the progress, and also very intrigued by the discoveries that you've been sharing, because they're constantly well written and a deep dive into whatever thing it is that you're sharing. Most recently you spotlighted one of your Mark Bright pages, I believe it was, and just delving into the detail of a single page. It's fascinating to see.
Thanks. Owning a comic book store suggests I guess I'm biased more towards G.I. Joe comics, and then secondarily the animation. And I love the toys. I absolutely love the toys, but probably one can't love or know more about all three things. So when I'm writing for the book, when I'm writing on my blog, if readers notice a subtle level of excitement when I'm writing about comics or animation that's not there with the toys, I guess it's because I'm more comfortable writing about comics and animation, because I have been an animator for television. I have not been a toy designer, although I know toy designers.
But am I right? I'm right in thinking that you sort of started kind of at least the concept of writing a book all the way back in 2001. Is that right?
Correct. I read John Micklig's G.I. Joe: The Complete Story of America's Favorite Man of Action, which is this gorgeous, well-written and informational hardcover coffee table book, which came out in '98. And it's about the 60s and 70s Joe. And it's not a toy guide. It's not an encyclopedia. It tells the story of people at Hasbro coming up with ideas and marketing, and the photography's great and the design's great. Around the same time I was in college, we had a student newspaper. I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and students were so busy with their own work. There wasn't a ton of social culture, and there wasn't a lot of extracurricular stuff. People just generally just did their own work. There was not a lot of partying. And one of the few things that did happen, there was a school student newspaper, and I volunteered. The editor was losing steam. I volunteered to guest edit an issue, and I wanted to just turn it into a G.I. Joe issue, which would have nothing to do with our college. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of a joke, but it was also earnest. And, you're buying a magazine, and one issue is just completely given over to Seinfeld, or one issue is just completely given over to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I sort of wrote the entire issue, and I redid our logo so it looks like the G.I. Joe stencil, and I sat with the graphic designer. Anyway, that came out, and these two things were sort of stewing in my head. So I started doing interviews, and I didn't quite know it was a book that I was working on. But, in 2001, there was email, but there wasn't as much of it, and there was not social media. So Someone had put Larry Hama's email address on the internet, not by accident, but in an innocent way, and people were not abusing it and bothering him. So when I sent him an email, an interview request, he responded favorably. And I didn't want to do it by phone or fax. Took a train in New York. And I have a friend in New York anyway, so I had a couch to crash on. And then separately, I had by accident met Larry Houston in Los Angeles a few years earlier, who worked on the TV show. He's storyboarded and co-wrote an episode. He co-wrote Hearts and Cannons. And so I called him and I said, I don't know if you remember this. We had lunch 4 years ago. Can I interview you about the TV show? So each interview, someone at the end of it would say, oh, have you spoken to so-and-so? Or I would say, who should I talk to next? Or I'd say, hey, do you have a phone number for so-and-so? Mm-hmm. Then it was a lot of cold calling and some email. 276 interviews later, there's very little cold calling. You know, I can find people on Facebook or LinkedIn. I'd like to think I'm basically done with the interviews, but I've also written...
I've heard you say this before as well.
Correct.
So you said 276. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Your website says 215. I'm sure I've previously heard you talking about 150 and think I'm done.
So I was talking to my my friend who is my editor, and I said, I need to go back and write about the video games and the computer games. I don't know if that should be its own chapter or if that should be a paragraph in each chapter so we can follow the chronology. And he found someone who worked on the second G.I. Joe video game, computer game. And so I contacted the guy. This was July. This was this year.
Oh, wow.
And immediately crunched that transcript into 2 paragraphs and put it into chapter 5. And so there are a few more interviews that I'd like. There's one Hasbro toy designer who I didn't think was interested and couldn't quite find. And someone said, oh, no, I found him. I think he might talk to you. Years ago, I was doing 2 or 3 interviews a month. And this year I have done 1. So part of that's because of the pandemic. Things have slowed down.
But people are at home without things to do, so
that's true. I guess I did 2 or 3 this year. That is true. So I've written, the book's going to be 20 chapters. The first chapter is a quick review of Hasbro's founding, the 60s and 70s, and then chapter 2 is Hasbro convincing itself to bring G.I. Joe back for 1982 and then doing it. Chapter 3 is it hits in 1983, and then chapters 18 and 19 are G.I. Joe Extreme, Sergeant Savage, and the movies that didn't get made, a chapter I'm really happy with. And then chapter 20 is so not quite now, getting to now, but I want to get to 2007 because I feel like the 25th anniversary line completes the circle of Real American Hero. And, I would happily have a paragraph or something about the movies or the newest video game.
Okay, but that means you're missing the whole IDW era then.
Yeah, again, that could be a sentence or a paragraph, but whatever it is, it needs to have an end point. The end point could be 1994, and there could just be one paragraph on the unproduced 1995 line, or 95 could be the end, and there could be a paragraph on Savage and Extreme. I feel like once we get to the modern era, particularly with the 2 movies, I don't know that that's another book, but that does feel like something more substantial, like an article or a series of articles that needs its own breathing space. And, if a publisher said to me, no, 30 more pages, get to the Snake Eyes movie, I would happily make that accommodation.
So where are you with it? How far is it away from actually being a book that the general public can see?
This is a good question. So I've written 19 of the chapters. 9 of them need a significant edit, like a revision, because I wrote them more than 5 or 7 years ago. And sort of the second half of the book got a little more developed as I figured out now what I was saying. So I need to go back and bring the first half of the book up the level of the second half. Each time I finish a chapter, I send it to my designer, Liz Awney, who's in Rhode Island, and I'm in Massachusetts, so she's an hour south of me. and she will take my images and my words and she'll make them pretty. So she's designed 15 chapters, and I want her to revise several of them as well, as I have found new information and new images. It's easier to say the work that is left to do than the timeline that is left. Teaching and my store have slowed things down. I'm actually going to start teaching less next semester because for years, like friends have said, you should take a sabbatical, like spend a year just writing. And it's hard to do that, but I'm not quite doing it, but I'm taking that advice halfway. So January is a big push for the book. And, 2021 feels a lot more hopeful than 2020 in terms of world health. So I can't say months or years to answer your question. And there's a part B, which is writing and finishing the book are different than getting the book published or publishing the book. And that could involve other companies and rights holders. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for your patience. It has not stalled. I am not stopping or giving up. I am working on this. I do work on this. I very much appreciate the occasional comment or email from people who've been following this or discover my blog. But this is the hardest thing I've ever done, and it's only doable because I have given myself or taken a lot of time to do it. Like, I don't know how to build a car, but if you gave me 10 years, I could build a car and drive cross country. So
you could have built 2 cars by now.
if I take 19 years, I can write a book, but also, I can start a business and start another business and have another job. So also I should say, while the store and teaching have slowed down progress on the book, they've also helped the book because they've made me a better writer, a better business person, and they give me some legitimacy. Because if I'm just at home writing a book and I reach out to someone and I say, I'm writing a book, they'll say, who are you? But if I say, hi, I'm a professor of animation history at so-and-so and I own this store, they might say, oh, wait, I was in Boston. I've heard of that store.
Yeah, it gives a bit of credibility, hey. I think I can hear something coming down the road, and it's something a little bit strange and different. It's a G.I. Joe pub quiz. It's a G.I. Joe pub quiz. It's a G.I. Joe pub quiz. Question 1. So it is the annual Cobra Moustache Festival in Springfield Stadium. Naugahyde, Dr. Mindbender, Rock Viper are in the finale for Cobra Commander to judge the finest moustache. But who does he choose to win?
He chooses Naugahyde because when Cobra Commander put on his disguise in issue, was it 55? It was sort of a big, grand, like hanging off your face mustache.
Droopy.
And Naugahyde does that and goes a step further.
Yeah, he'd certainly get my vote. That's probably the most impressive moustache on
You know what? Cobra Commander is going to break the rules, so he's going to pick someone who's not in the finals. Did you say Zanzibar was in the running?
He wasn't in the final, but he's not one to listen to the rules, is he?
Yeah, I think Cobra Commander would stand up and knock over a brazier of flame and point and say, "Bring in Zanzibar." He wins.
You do have to give props to the Rock Viper as well, though, for sporting that tash.
I've always been confused, tickled, and confused. Like, is this the one time that Hasbro decided that it's actually just a single guy and not dozens and dozens of guys? Or is this the dress code? It's like, is it the Yankees? I don't follow baseball. Like the Yankees they're all clean shaven, right? And then it's like other teams can have scruffy beards, but if you're a Yankee, you have to shave, right? So it's like, are all the other Viper Corps like that? But it's the Rock Vipers who have mustaches, or is there just one Rock Viper?
Could be. Who knows? I'd like to think that it's part of the dress code that they insist that Rock Viper sports a fine moustache to join the ranks. So after that little deviation, we'll track right back to the main subject that we were discussing, and that's the book, and specifically the designer. So when you were commissioning that, was that like a private commission, or was it part of an umbrella deal of some sort with a publisher?
There is no deal. There's no contract with a publisher or any rights holders. I pitched the book to a publisher many years ago, and I didn't want to send them a Microsoft Word document. I wanted to send them PDFs of finished chapters or printouts of finished chapters. So I hired Liz at the design firm where she was. And after we did those 3 chapters, I thought I should keep doing this. So she's on my side, just as a side deal. And and I apologize. I still do this because I see people's names as words when I type their email addresses. I referred to Liz with her maiden name, and Liz is for years. So sorry, Liz. Liz Souza. Liz Souza is my designer.
But there's been some quite nice hardcover efforts in terms of the G.I. Joe books coming at it from different angles. So there was the Mark Bellamo, I think it is something called something like the Ultimate Guide to G.I. Joe, which is essentially it's a lot of toy photography and sort of deep down dives on the early era G.I. Joe figures. I'm sure you're very familiar with the book. Nicely put together, at least in my opinion. And I know the guys at 3D Joes, they've been doing their soft cover volumes, focusing in on the art associated with G.I. Joe properties, a lot of the file card art, box art, that kind, and various merchandising art. Produce very nice art books, and I know that they're looking to convert, sort of upsell into a hardcover book eventually as well, and I know crowdfunding has been quite a success for a number of people that I don't know if you've heard of them, but the Etherington brothers have done an enormously successful book called How to Think When You Draw, which is essentially sort of a bit of a drawing guide, and these are comic book guys who have done various strips, but now almost entirely focused in on these projects that they've done, because they've been so successful. I can't remember off the top of my head how much they raised in their last Kickstarter, but it was in the hundreds of thousands of pounds we're talking about. So there's people having some success in getting their work out there and not necessarily needing to be constrained by the typical publisher route of finding their way into the market.
To acknowledge Carson Metaxas, who 3D Joe's is very much him as a one-man operation. And I know he's got the occasional contributor, but all that Photoshop work and website design is him by himself. I do think about Kickstarter every day, and I do pay attention to Kickstarter projects that are general toy and pop culture and arts related, as well as the G.I. Joe specific ones. Kickstarter, because it's not just a project, it's a cause, and it can be emotional and it can have momentum. Like it's one thing to set up a table at a convention and say, please buy my book. But it's another thing to have a little outpost on the internet where for 4 weeks you're saying, hey, everyone, tell everyone else. And, people can see that gauge fill up with more and more pledges. So those projects, so 3D Joe's art books, those are photos of the toy packaging with very nicely photoshopped, corrected, the package art paintings.
Enhancement.
So those are, photos and scans of toy packaging. Belomo's book, great photos of the toys. And there are others out there. My book, it's several things at once. It's toys and comics and animation and marketing and also film. And it covers 82 to 95 mostly. And, some of these other projects are just the toys. And, there's a wonderful website, which is a guide to every episode of just the cartoon. Part of my explanation, if people wonder why this is taking so darn long, is that I've cast a wider net. So there are more people to talk to and more comparisons to make. And the actual act of writing, if I was just telling the story of one of these things, I could go chronologically. It's like, well, this year of the show, and then they hired new writers, and then there were more episodes. But every couple of paragraphs or every couple of pages in my chronology, I have to stop and jump back. It's like, all right, we've moved ahead a year in the toys. before I get too far with the toys, I need to go back and explain what was happening at the same time with the comic book. And then here and there, they converge. Cobra Commander is getting replaced in the animated movie, so this is going to also have to happen in the comic. And sometimes that can just be a sentence. Other times, it's me staring at my monitor for 20 minutes, scared of highlighting a whole paragraph and moving it 8 pages down or to another chapter. And of course, through the magic of saving Microsoft Word documents, that should be easy. Sometimes writing is easy and it flows. Sometimes it's scary and it's hard. It's like drawing. It's like as I have gathered more people and facts and anecdotes and pieces of art. A couple of my friends have joked that what I really need is a grad student as an intern, just to manage objects in my room. It's like, I need this piece of artwork. Go over there and find it in that flat file. Or, when I say to people, someone's like, what did you do today? And I'll say, I was writing my book. And that might mean sitting and typing new words. It might mean rereading a chapter from last week or last year and reminding myself where I was. Or, that chapter was 95% done, but I know I needed to fact check one thing and rewrite one paragraph. And for some reason I hit a wall and I come back to it and, that's not scary anymore. I figured that out, or I found that fact, or now I'm in the mood to go Google for an hour and find that fact. Sometimes I am actually at the computer and writing, and other times I'm just moving files around on my computer or, finding artwork in these flat files. And sometimes if I say I'm writing on my book, I'm really writing on my blog, which also takes up that time. And each of these blog posts, I keep thinking to myself, okay, I'm just going to post this one, like Ron Rudat or Mark Pennington or Kurt Groen drawing on my blog. I'm just going to write 2 sentences. Here's an action figure that someone pitched in 1988. It didn't get made. But then it's 5 hours later. I need to give a biographical sentence on that toy designer, comment on how this figure looks back to a different figure, ahead to another figure. Maybe we saw this helmet show up somewhere else. Some personal anecdote about how I think grappling hooks are cool. And then some fact checking. It's like, wait, was it Pennington who started on the last day of 85? Was it the last day of 86? Open up 3 interview transcripts, word search for the word December. So what this needs is time and occasional encouragement. My wife is a big silent partner in this, in putting her hand on my shoulder and saying, this is good, or why don't you go write?
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like it's the book that I want to see. I'm your target audience here that sort of grew up reading G.I. Joe action, / Action Force, reading the comics, particularly collecting the toys, watching the cartoons to a slightly lesser extent because we didn't really get them so much over here in the UK. And yeah, I'm just intrigued and interested by all aspects of it, particularly in some of those deep dives of understanding some of the background, particularly on the comic book side, and understanding the dynamics of what was going on over in Hasbro and in the cartoons was linking back into what was happening in the comic, and all of these kind of things. It's just really fascinating to me. So I'm anxious to eventually see this thing.
Thank you for saying so, and thank you for your patience.
But actually, there's something just coming down and going to completely disrupt us and take us off course once again, because it's a G.I. Joe pub quiz, it's a G.I. Joe pub quiz, it's a G.I. Joe pub quiz. Question 2. 4 Joes are captured and imprisoned by Cobra. They're kept in cells together with their pets. It's Spearheader Max, Snake Eyes and Timber, Shipwreck and Polly, and Mutt and Junkyard. The unfortunate Joe captives die of thirst and starvation. But which is the first G.I. Joe pet to begin eating its owner?
So I think the go-to answer would be Timber, because wolves are not wolves are wolves,
yeah,
but
wild.
Timber isn't quite feral. Timber's domesticated, and Junkyard is too loyal. I don't think parrots are meat eaters, and we know so little about Max from comics and animation. So Max, definitely.
Yeah, it's going to be the cat, isn't it? They're in it for themselves.
Going back to a topic you were sort of on before question two. With my book, what I have realized I'm really interested in are trends. A couple times someone has commented on my blog. I post a drawing or a photocopy of an action figure that didn't get made, and someone says, "Oh, that's so great! This would have been a variation." Or from a collector, I have a photo. I have a photo of the memo from sculpting to the sculptor, which said, "You have to redo Zorana's torso because her breasts, one slightly larger than the other." And as an artifact, that's amazing. That kind of level of detail is included. But we think about product design, and of course it would. It might be a foot, it might be an eyebrow, it might be the ears. This ear is too big, this ear is too high. And someone said to me, "Oh, I can't wait to see all of that stuff, all of the decisions and the memos and all the sort of variations for the toys." And there is a little bit of that. But since my book isn't the definitive toy guide, there's more big picture stuff. And I see that as trends. And I mean, certainly I'll take out a sentence here or two or an image here or there to show that something changed or something was pitched and not accepted, because that is part of the process. And the idea is on every page you're going to see something you've never seen or learn something you've never learned. It might be a fact, it might be an opinion, an anecdote or a joke. And there's so much material, even with other people on the internet and in their own publishing, revealing some of these facts and ideas. There's still a wealth of stuff to reveal. So I don't want to disappoint that person that's looking for all of these amazing little changes and variations. Cobra Commander was going to have 82 Cobra Commander was going to have a stripe on the top of his helmet, and that got costed out. And that is interesting. But
okay, and that's true as well, is it?
I think I have a memo that shows that. Yeah. Also, I think I haven't posted that on my blog because there's this whole category of stuff on my hard drive where I don't know if I want to put it in my blog because I might put it in my book. But that is interesting, particularly that first year where they're figuring out budget. And it is interesting, 5 or 10 years later, when a figure we know shows up as underpainted and we'd like to know the story, why, or what it could have looked like. But more interesting than that are the trends, which is, okay, in toy making, how does G.I. Joe change from 82 to 86 to 90 to 94 as the market changes? G.I. Joe is constantly reacting to the competitor product. G.I. Joe is constantly innovating because of R&D, right? That's guys who are sitting and drawing characters. That's sculptors who are coming up with better processes. That's marketing that's coming up with new hooks and gimmicks and story ideas. That's toy packaging, right? The logo goes from 2D to 3D. The paintings become those sort of digital paint. The explosions go from organic to digital. Quote digital. They were still drawn, and then later to just red and blue lasers. And a question that I'm interested in answering is why? Not as often what. What's the difference between Cobra Commander with a little stripe on his helmet or not? But why? It's okay, well, that one, that's money. And with the comic book, 1986, 1987, 1988, the comic book explodes with spin-offs. Comic book goes bi-weekly, right? The yearbooks happen a little bit more often. Not just special missions, but Order of Battle and Transformers, and then Blackthorn does the 3D book and how to draw. Why? Right? And I mean, we could all guess. Money. There's money to be made in G.I. Joe, right? Why does the show change? And a lot of the answers are either market forces or creative decisions, or sort of the combination of the two, business decisions. And some of this is personality, right? Ron Friedman wrote the first 15 episodes of G.I. Joe. They are different than the rest of season 1 because season 1 was story edited by Steve Gerber, and then season 2 is story edited by Buzz Dixon. And Gerber and Dixon write more similarly to each other than either of them do to Ron Friedman, right? The first 15 episodes, I know there's crazy sci-fi and silly stuff in later episodes, the Space Needle restaurant that launches into space and wetsuits an astronaut with Ziploc bags, right? And again, it's silly, but it's actually grounded, even though it is unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of the ease which like Joes are astronauts in the first 15 episodes, or Cobra like hijacks a space shuttle launch. There is a difference in tone, and that the why of it is because the writers were different and the writers had slightly different goals, right? And so it's really exciting in interviewing Steve Gerber. I have what I think is the second to last interview that he granted, and
Okay.
he didn't say anything revelatory to me, but it was really cool just to connect with him. And he'd already given an amazing interview in a magazine in 1985 that I was quoting in my book anyway.
Uh-huh.
But for him and Buzz Dixon to say something like, "Oh, Ron Friedman had this focus. We had this other focus." And even if it's just a sentence, I feel like it puts a light bulb over my head in a way that a lot of the was. I saw a real German Shepherd the other day, and I don't know if this has happened to you. There should be a word for this phenomenon where toys have sort of lied to you for your whole life. I saw a real German Shepherd, just someone on my sidewalk walking their dog the other day, and I thought, my God, that's a big dog. Order isn't that big. And then I thought, oh, wait, well, Order's bigger in the movie than sort of as the toy. Is the toy small because they're saving money, or like the molds couldn't be that big, or like the bubble on the card couldn't go over that far? Is it about weight, like shipping weight? Like, it's probably money. It's probably not like, no, we need to make it smaller and cuter because kids are scared of big dogs. But like, wait, that's not accurate. It's accurate enough. And then I thought,
it's the size you imagine the dog to be rather than actually the size that it should be. I guess there's a similar phenomenon with like R2D2 and Yoda on occasion, that you'll look at the scale of them and think, wait, is that right? Are they really that size in compared to the regular humans size proportions? And I think there is various proportionality that is a little bit off, but it doesn't necessarily register as being odd.
Yeah. There's more leeway with Yoda and R2D2 because they're fantastical characters, and I guess at a theme park or in a parade, you actually might stand next to R2D2, but more likely we're going to stand next to a German Shepherd. But next someone's going to tell me that wolves and parrots are actually bigger than Hasbro sculpted them as. One of the reasons why I like the 80s and 90s figures more than the modern era figures, it's not just O-rings versus no O-rings. I appreciate how much more detail, particularly with all the secondary stuff like bandoliers on the newer figures. I don't even mean classified. I mean, 2007 and up. The figures look great. Part of what I love about the O-ring era is that all the toys the proportions are just a little unrealistic, right? They're all a little short. They're all a little, I use this word very cautiously, cute, right? They're just they're like 5% stubbier, and they both look realistic, like real people with these awesome costumes and accessories. But they also look like toys. And 2007 and up, it's so exciting to see like the detail. It's like, oh, that was a knife that was on his shin. I just always thought it was a melted knife that like wrapped against his shin, but it's a knife in a scabbard or a sheath. But the newer figures, they're so realistic. I find the original line so charming. And that's a word that I think of a lot, both for the toy and the comic and the show. They're so charming. It's the personality of the characters. It's the realistic and gritty, but also silly story moments like, astronauts with Ziploc bags. It's the color schemes, right? Like mostly why I wanted to draw Cobra is just to celebrate these wonderful color schemes. And this is something that, I don't think gets talked about enough in G.I. Joe or Transformers for that matter. There's something so handsome about 1982, 3, and 4 Cobra. All this dark blue, black, and red, like the 86 Viper, just perfect. Whatever the expression, as a plastic toy, as animation cells on TV, as ink printed on paper. And even where things get goofy, like, the second Heat Viper, who's that green
Right.
with the black. Like that does not work for me. It wants a third color, maybe a dark gray mixed in with the black. And the green doesn't feel like the original Heat Viper, but I still appreciate that. And sometimes I just want to sort of live in those colors, and that's staring at a TV or doing a drawing of my own.
Wow, that was quite a deviation. I'm really it's really enjoying this conversation. But I want to delve into some more of what you've been doing on your book and what you've been finding out, and speaking with what was it, 276 people now. What have been some of like the unexpected highlights and sort of discoveries that you've made, if you're able to share some of those? And I imagine, talking to that number of people, there's some where maybe you feel like you're kind of almost going through the process, you just want to cover all the bases, and then you just have this amazing conversation where you just uncover all of this unexpected stuff. And conversely, talking to somebody like, perhaps I get the impression, Russ Heath, where he's saying, sorry buddy, I just don't remember any of it, I can't tell you.
Yeah. So to be fair, it's I should probably phrase it differently. It's 275 interviews, but some of them I've done 2 interviews with a person. So the number of people I've interviewed is a little smaller than that, but it's still really impressive. Some highlights or cool facts. I mean, this is a well-told anecdote. It shows up in most Larry Hama interviews, but he was interview number 1, and when he said, I was the last guy they asked. They walked down editor's row and asked all the editors at Marvel who wanted to write this toy tie-in book. And I had wanted to write, and I couldn't get hired as a writer. I was just an editor. And I said, I'll do it. And in other interviews, he has said, I would have taken Barbie if they'd offered me Barbie, right? And we're all sort of like shocked and like giggling at that. But he's a writer and he wants to write. When I interviewed Kurt Groen, one of the toy designers, one of the figure designers, right? Sort of after Ron Rudat, he had just graduated from the Joe Kubert School in Delaware. And Delaware and New Jersey. It's in Dover. Both those states have, anyway, it's in the middle of nowhere. I'm sorry to all the students and alums of the Joe Kubert School. And the Kubert School is about making comic book artists. And I don't know if they still have their animation training program, but Ron Wagner had gone there, and some other people that we know in comics and in G.I. Joe had gone there. And, Kurt Groen wanted to break into comics, but he got this job designing toys. And he didn't quite say this, but what I have decided or figured out from looking at his designs is that part of why G.I. Joe changes in the late 80s and early 90s is Ron Rudat, with his figures, he's looking at a lot of realistic military reference. And, Ron Rudat is a Civil War reenactor.
Oh, wow.
Right? And he paints landscapes, and he also paints military miniatures as a hobby. And Rudat had been at Hasbro already now for 5 or 10 years. Kurt Groen gets hired out of school, and he wants to be a comic book artist. And this might be putting too fine a point on it, but I look at the later G.I. Joe figures, and I see superhero influences. Gambit's in X-Men, you think of Gambit's headgear.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The headband, right.
And then you look at Hawk version 3 or 4 with the jetpack. Yeah. And that may be a straight line, and it may not be. And it may not be as simple as like Kurt Groen wanted to draw X-Men. I don't know if they want to draw X-Men, but Kurt Groen wanted to draw superhero comics, and he's drawing G.I. Joe instead. It may not be that simple, and it may have been in the air, right? Like everyone was watching the X-Men cartoon, the comic was selling like crazy, and just you see that character. And then again, sort of higher up than Kurt Groen or broader than him in Hasbro in the second half of Real American Hero, it's like, okay, well, we've done several years of like military. Now, how do we change it to stay current so that we're not doing the same thing over and over again? Well, let me throw it back to you. Is there a category? Because sometimes when I'm on the spot, it's like I don't remember who I interviewed.
Yeah, it's the comics is the most interesting thing to me, and I think that there's a whole bunch of interesting things happening in the comic, and possibly maybe even on the Hasbro slash editorial side in terms of how some of the direction of things that went on and came about strikes me as interesting. And I think one of them, which I've pretty much figured out by myself, but probably not the only one that's come to this realization, is around some of the Dreadnoks appearances in the early issues. I think in the 30s, I think this is, where they appeared on the covers about 3 times, and I think this is linked to the advertising, and also the same sequence where the Dreadnoks are sort of tearing into Sky Striker type jets appears 3 times in those same books. I think initially where they're attacking the G.I. Joe Sky Striker. Another time they're tearing into another jet that looks like a Sky Striker but isn't, and another time it's a kind of flashback to remember when that happened. And I think that was all tied to do with the Dreadnought figures being advertised via the comic books that were coming out, because they were doing these adverts for the comic, featuring particular figures that they wanted to highlight that were in the stores. And I believe the Dreadnoks release date kept on getting pushed back, and so this advertisement for the comic kept on having to get pushed back as well, and reusing that same animation footage of the Dreadnoks attacking the Sky Strikers, and that really influencing the comics in terms of, you've got to have the Dreadnoks and you've got to feature them attacking a Sky Striker, and this resulting in them appearing on 3 separate covers within very short order, and also this segment appearing 3 times.
Someone made this point that the scheduling of some of the ads looked like this ad should have been for this issue and vice versa. And what did I know about it? And when I get that kind of question, sometimes I'm embarrassed, because in this case I don't know, and I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't lined up those seeming inconsistencies. So I don't have a specific answer to that question, but your guess that the scheduling is such a job, because it's like, when are the toys going to pass safety inspection? When are the toys when are we going to get our sample from China? When are we going to get our next sample? When's the first couple of 10,000 going to show up on a boat? And coordinating that with, an animation company in New York, and also, footage coming from Japan, and then also a publisher that works on its own monthly schedule, right? The animated commercials for the comic are supposed to be quarterly, but the figures are coming in waves that breaks down to 3 times a year. And, it's one thing for the toys to show up in America on a boat in, I don't know, Seattle or New York or San Francisco. It's another thing for all these boxes to get trucked to all of these warehouses that then go to all these toy stores and stores. So I have an overall idea, which is, yes, scheduling. I don't know, if we're hoping for some little pinch of spice or controversy, I don't think it was anything like, Ripper's gun was too sharp and they had to redo it. It's not that. Sometimes that kind of thing happened. People talk about, was it 92, 93 Roadblocks, Action Weapon, and for a little while, do I have that right? What year is he?
Oh, I don't know. This is the one with the spring-loaded launcher. Is that?
Yeah. And, for a couple years, people were guessing or asking, well, was it that it hurt someone? Because, spring-fired missiles in history have hurt kids. And then there are recalls, or, something gets torqued down, or, Vinny DeLeva, who was product manager marketing on G.I. Joe at the time, popped up on Facebook. And I think Carson Metaxas of 3D Joe's actually I think he started this thread on Facebook like a year or two ago, and there's a picture of the toy, and I don't know if he was asking the question or just saying, "Hey everyone, remember this?" or just showing a picture of the packaging to give an update. But someone says, "Was it because it hurt someone?" And Vinny DeLeva pops up and says, "No, it just broke. We had over sort of torqued it, and the rubber band snapped, or the zip strip would snap." And forgive me for not remembering the specific. I took a screen cap of it, so I can refer to it in chapter 16 if I need to. But one of the neat things that I have in terms of paperwork is from 82, the schedule from the ad agency of which advertisements would air when. And it's staggered. It's like this ad is going to run in July for 4 weeks, and then that final week, this other ad is also going to start running, and then it runs for a couple weeks by itself. Leading up to Christmas, we're going to advertise the bigger toy, the Mobat or the headquarters. And that's the kind of thing which, if you've never thought about it, you might not realize it's a decision. And if you have thought about it, it just totally makes sense. Like, well, of course there's a schedule for which ads run when, but to see the actual, it's a photocopy. To see the actual piece of paper where, the ad agency in coordination with Hasbro, because it's all advertising dollars. This is all money they're spending.
Mm-hmm.
Some of this is going to be in like larger markets, like New York, Chicago, LA, and some of it's just going to be sort of national and uniform. And it's seeing this kind of, like I get a thrill from seeing a prototype or original artwork. I get a real thrill from seeing paperwork. Because it's a different kind of decision making. Yeah. It's more often like people wearing ties and worrying about money, as opposed to a piece of Bristol with ink on it, where it's like, okay, this is one guy sitting at a drawing table in like Georgia or New York, and he's like, should I show the tank from the front or from the rear? And gosh, this tank is hard to draw.
And in terms of your research for your book, was there anyone that you really wanted to get to talk to, and for whatever reason just haven't been able to get hold of them, get spend some time with them?
Yes, there is a Hasbro designer who maybe I didn't try at the right time or the right way. Email, phone number, LinkedIn, Facebook. There's a Hasbro designer who I couldn't get through to, although a fellow fan found this person and sent me some contact information. So I think I'll try next month. And I wrote around it. This person had a smaller contribution, and so I don't think it sticks out in the chapter where there isn't a paragraph about them. And then there was a higher up person at Hasbro who I have some quotes from an interview from a toy magazine from the 90s, and I feel like I sort of adequately include this person. And I cold called a phone number, and someone in the household, this is many years ago, said like, "Oh, this person gets a lot of phone calls from fans. Like, no, thank you." And I wanted to say, "No, this is for my book. I'm not just a fan." But this person, it's 5 or 10 years later. Maybe I can try again if this person's retired or someone else like me who's done some research has gotten through.
Find a contact on social media, ping them a message, new avenues to contact.
And there is someone, the chapter about G.I. Joe Extreme, which I'm also really happy with, because that story hasn't really been told. And you could argue a lot of people don't need to hear that story. But again, it's so interesting because a trend, right? So much about Extreme was let's do things differently. But ultimately, a lot of things were done similarly. And, how much did it work? So I did get through to a few people who had been at Kenner. One person high up said, "I was big picture. I don't really remember anything. I don't think I'm the right person for you." And I believe this person. I would still have loved to talk with them for 40 minutes because I would love to hear some big picture stuff about toy companies and Kenner in 1996. And then there was a designer who I sent an email to, and I didn't hear back. And then 2 years later, I tried again. And this person said, "So what is this? What's this project of yours?" And I explained it, and they said, they're very polite. They said, "This wasn't a highlight for me. the line wasn't very popular, and there are other things I did at Kenner that mean a lot more to me. So, no, thank you. I'm not going to contribute. And again, I feel like I have a little information about this person from someone else, and I can reasonably represent their contribution without any firsthand information. But overall, I was doing this long ago enough, and people are nice and giving of their time. So I don't feel like I missed anyone super important because they died or because they're like super grumpy and mean. If you're nice,
absolutely. So you've been able to get time with almost all of the major artists that have done the runs on the book.
Yeah, I get not Frank Springer, so I guess I take that back. Some people have passed away, but I spoke with Trimpy
a few years ago as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I didn't realize I wanted to talk with him. I thought when I wrote that chapter, I sort of wasn't paying attention to those issues. Like, oh, he didn't do that many issues, and it didn't seem like he was a regular artist, so I can sort of skip that. And then a couple years later, I thought, oh no, he drew like 6 or 7 issues, and if I had contacted, someone might say, as you mentioned before, like, I don't remember. And then I can at least check that box off.
And what's so interesting as well about the G.I. Joe artists is that for a fair few of them, it was some of their earliest work. So like you say, Ron Garney, I think Ron Wagner was almost new to the book. Rod Wiggum, I think it was some of his earliest professional work as well. And you just wouldn't think it to look at it. It looks like they just arrived so fully formed as a proper professional comic book artist. You would never really imagine that this is them starting out, because it just seems so fully formed. In my favorite in particular is Rod Wiggum. It just his stuff just seems like to me the perfect embodiment of the way that it should be drawn almost.
It speaks to the editorial standards of Marvel at the time, and there was a barrier for entry. You couldn't get hired on a Marvel book, even in 82, 83, 84, 85, a top-selling Marvel book. But in 93, not a top-selling book. You couldn't get hired unless you were pretty darn good. And this book in particular, you had to be able to do everything. And Larry Hama was not the editor of the book, he was the writer. But he acted as a kind of editor on the book because he was an editor at Marvel for half those years. And also, he was thinking like an editor in his approach. Like Todd McFarlane didn't draw any more issues because Larry Hama didn't think he was a good enough storyteller. And Larry's correct. Todd McFarlane, the 2 issues that he drew, there's lots of detail, and you think about Spider-Man's webs and all those crazy poses and all the lines and people's hair and their eyelashes when he draws Spider-Man or Spawn. In terms of detail, McFarlane was a great choice for that book. So kudos to, I think it was Bob Harris, the editor, who placed him there. But like, you look at the first page that he draws. And this is in a book called The Art of Todd McFarlane. He spends 2 pages of that book, one is art, one's paragraphs, on getting hired and fired on and off of G.I. Joe. And then he lands on Hulk, so he's fine. But you look at that first page that he drew, and it's from what ended up being issue 60 or 61, a couple Joes at an airport. He draws a great, like, the camera is like medium close. And he really needed to pull the camera back and show more of the cars that are dropping people off, and then the building and the sidewalk that is the, like, departures area of the plane. And then I guess it's Falcon, I forget, who's like in the scene and like on a radio talking to some other Joe.
Yeah.
And McFarlane drew it really well, but he didn't, in terms of story, he didn't draw the right thing. At the same time, Marvel was hiring a lot of guys in 93, 94. And I'm not speaking about G.I. Joe artists who were not quite ready.
I think that issue you're talking about, the first McFarlane one, as well as an interesting panel there, which is either had a paste over or was redone in the studio, and it looks enormously like it was Mark Teixeira who was working on Wolverine with Larry. I don't know if it was at the time, but at some point. And yeah, that for that particular panel, the switch in style and the Mark Teixeira style is quite distinctive.
I will go look at that after we. When you look at original art, sometimes what you see is an art correction, not because someone's drawing or storytelling was poor. Sometimes it's because the letterer forgot to include a couple word balloons. And now you need to add twice as many word balloons to one panel. And suddenly the art has to shrink. So there's just a bunch of neutral space above it. Or it's like, well, if we add these word balloons that are missing, we're going to cover up these other people. So let's just get someone at the bullpen to redraw this panel and loosely match the style. And sometimes it's because, the writer or the editor, or maybe in this case, the toy company has an important idea for a change. We're used to seeing in the catalogs for G.I. Joe toys and the advertising, well, that's definitely a prototype. Or, oh, this guy didn't get that gun when the toy was released 6 months later. And sometimes, that's what was available, or someone made a creative or business decision. It's like, no, we're going to redo those arms. Those arms are too big.
What we had, which it's almost unique, it's not something that you can see very often, is that redo of the second Mark McFarlane issue, because we had the issue that appeared on the in the normal release at the time, but then after the event we had the reprint of the unpublished McFarlane version of that same issue in the special, and you're actually able to hold them up side by side and see the different choices of the artist, and sort of just pretty objectively you can see that the published art that appeared was just head and shoulders above the rejected McFarlane art. Just page by page you can the choices that were made. That's it. The issue that was published looks pretty great, and was it Marshall Rogers, I think, was the artist that picked it up in the end. But there's some great panels there, and
I also find the Marshall Rogers issue, the storytelling is clear, but it is less exciting. Mm-hmm. And some of that may be because he's a different artist. I suspect he had less than the normal amount of time to draw that issue. You can make a similar comparison with issue 23 that Russ Heath drew, mm-hmm. because Mike Vosberg also drew that entire issue, and it didn't get published.
Yeah. Have you ever seen it?
And yeah, I have photocopies of all of it.
Oh, wow. I'd love to see that.
And somewhere on his blog, Vosberg posted some of it. I think that was a year ago. But, they draw differently from each other, and their whole sort of shape vocabulary for how you're going to fit certain characters into a panel is different. And both of them, this isn't like where one of them had a weakness and one of them had a strength. The comparison here is Russ Heath's issue looks like the show because he was model designer on the show, and Vosberg's issue looks like the comic because he had just drawn the comic for a year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can imagine how it would have been drawn by Vosberg in as much that we had a number of issues drawn by him already, so got a very good gist of his style. But Russ Heath's issue was at least something pretty special. It's one of my favourites. I think that style that he brought to that particular issue was something pretty incredible.
An earlier question you asked, sort of like which of the artists have I spoken to or not spoken to, and when I talked to Ron Wagner on the phone some years ago, his anecdote is that he was looking for work because he was just out of the Joe Kubert school, and he got a tip that this editor at Marvel would look at new work. And so Ron Wagner calls Larry Hama, and Hama says, if you don't have a bunch of pages of continuity for me to look at, I'm not interested. I don't want to look at one page. I don't want to look at a cover. And Larry looked at some samples and said, you're not there yet, but come back soon. I'm paraphrasing. So Wagner did some work at DC, and I think some of it was published and some of it wasn't. And then he came back, got hired on G.I. Joe, and then worked pretty much exclusively at Marvel for several years. G.I. Joe and Punisher, did 3 issues of Excalibur, which I don't know how I didn't realize this until this summer when I found them in my basement sort of by accident. And it's really fun to see them because it's all of the Ron Wagner shapes and the proportions, like his cheekbones and his eyes and how he draws hair and, leather. But it's more superheroic, although the story is sort of pretty grounded for Excalibur. And it's so great when he comes back many years later to do half of that IDW yearbook and then that one fill-in issue.
Yeah.
When was it? 218?
They're in the tanks. That one?
Yeah, it was the tank. Yeah. I can't remember the number, but it was the tank issue. Yeah, and I think that might have been one of those issues where someone says, we can't traverse the tank turrets down. Again, I don't mean that as a joke. I think that's awesome. I love that happens.
I've got 2 of the inked pages from that issue actually. I think from Brian Shearer's inks on over Ron Wagner's blue lines, and so I've sort of had a chance to kind of look at it really up close. And yeah, when you're looking at a page like that, you sort of and doing it quite intently, you sort of do definitely learn things and appreciate some of the work that goes into it. So way over and above when you're just flicking through it on a page. But
that's great. But
Ron Wagner is also an artist that his early stuff there in that work that he was doing on G.I. Joe. It's his style. It was very much in the footsteps of Rod Wiggum. Sort of not too far a deviation in style, but looking at his modern stuff, you can see definitely that progression in style and influences, and his character is a lot more angular, you might say. There's a definite style that is employed there that has evolved over time.
In his original run, I see some Joe Kubert, and he had been at the Joe Kubert school, so that makes sense. I don't know, how many of the classes Kubert was teaching himself, and certainly there are other people there besides Joe Kubert who teach. And in the later issue and a half, counting the yearbook, Wagner's stuff is like 15% simpler, which I mean as a compliment, and like 5% cartoonier. His eyes are a little bigger, his expressions. This isn't a full like Michael Golden comparison, but you look at Michael Golden's G.I. Joe covers, yearbook 2, his work on the Nam. Golden is cartooning his faces. Like he'll draw a realistic gun and clothing, but then he makes people's eyes a little bigger than realistic, and then he gives them like an archy cartoon mouth. And that is part of the appeal of Golden. And so I think Wagner, like a lot of artists, as he matures, he realizes he can say as much with less. And, sort of the biggest example of this in comics is Mike Mignola. Mignola's stuff early at Marvel when he breaks in, Rocket Raccoon miniseries, and he did some early Cloak and Dagger. You'd never know that this guy's stuff is going to get folded, flattened, abstracted, covered in shadows, and everyone's going to look like a statue, 20 years later, 5 years later. And Mignola's early stuff, it just looks like Marvel house style. It's got some little bit of, Rick Leonardi and Michael Golden and I guess Kirby. I don't know if I see it, but it's got to be there. By the time he's doing Cosmic Odyssey and then that sort of Hellboy issue of Legends of the Dark Knight and then Hellboy, he's just drawing like octagons and hexagons and everything looks like origami.
That's good.
In an awesome way. Like it has become abstracted. And I didn't like Mignola's stuff when I was first reading comics when I was 11 years old. I didn't get it, but I also didn't understand Kirby. I thought his stuff was weird and ugly. I didn't see the power, and I certainly didn't see like the storytelling and his wonderful sense of scale and technology design. And so yes, part of me wants Ron Wagner's stuff now to look like 1987, but that's unfair. That's like having your favorite band. It's like, why don't you sound like you used to? Like, well, that's not what artists do. And if they did, it'd be sad. It's like, why don't you stagnate? And like Wagner's stuff is satisfying in a different way, but it's better because he is like a Mignola. He's saying as much or more with less. And Rod Wiggum, same thing. like his first couple of issues, there's lots of crisp detail. And you look at the stuff he does right now for Gil Thorpe, this newspaper comic strip, and you look at the little bit of G.I. Joe that he did for IDW, and he is drawing less detail.
Yeah, very
and I'm
crisp,
trying to think,
clear lines, and yeah.
I wonder what the comparison. It's not as, his original run with Destro Search and Destroy. I think Destro Search and Destroy. I think Randy Emberlin is inking him, and it's going to add a different polish. And not enough time had passed for his stuff to have changed that much. Some artists, as they get older, draw less because drawing is hard. Drawing a comic is just one of the hardest things. 6-7 days a week, all day long. Motorcycles, horses, costumes, perspective, people, expressions, poses, fighting. You have to be a costume designer. Ron Wagner wants to come back and do another issue, a special annual, an issue just in the middle of the regular run. I'd love that. You mentioned Brian Shearer before. I really liked his issue with Duke last year, and I'm excited he's just done another issue. He's a really good fit for the book, and I have liked his inking, although I don't have a great sense of what his inking. I haven't seen him make a lot of other things, and when he was inking Shannon Gallant, I don't think other people were besides Gallant himself. So I like Shearer's stuff. I don't, even after all this time, I don't have the best handle on sort of what makes it.
Yeah. I don't know if you got quite to the end of your anecdote there about Ron Wagner and him starting out. Were you going to talk to the fact that Russ Heath ended up inking him?
Wagner was really excited about that because he was still new to comics, and Heath was his favorite or a favorite comics artist of his. And there are lots of stories in comics where someone just starting out, either because the editor is playing it smart, or just sort of through an accident of scheduling, like a really good veteran inker gets put on a new kid penciler and utterly elevates the work. That issue is a special kind of magic because Ron Wagner is, one of these like quintessential G.I. Joe comics artists. And the inking on some of his issues later on, because he's doing breakdowns, not full pencils, because he's running behind, because it's a hard book to draw. And I think Fred Fredericks is the inker.
Yeah, like over
Cobra
those
Civil
War issues, they sort of ping-ponging between, I think it's Ron Wagner and Marshall Rogers, and yeah, obviously they're sort of running a little bit behind with things and trying to go at speed.
Yeah, this issue inked by Heath, it's like the best of both worlds, because it's this like prototypical G.I. Joe comic book style that so many of us want, but it has this amazing polish on it from Russ Heath. Whether or not it looks more like the show, it just, like, a lot of action comics look back to his work because he's one of the best action comics artists of the century, like war comics. And then also he had his fingers in the TV show.
Yeah, so it's bringing, like, I guess Wagner's sort of new energy and his style, but with that Russ Heath polish to it, so you're getting the best of both worlds, really, the sort of that energy combined with that finish. And yeah, it's a spectacular looking issue.
And then on top of that, you have characters and vehicles that only showed up in animation briefly in the commercials. And it's always exciting when you can sort of imagine later toys that didn't get to appear in the show. Like this fantasy of mine would be, it's like, okay, we've had X-Files seasons 10 and 11. We've gone back to Star Wars movies. We got Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher back. And I know some writers and artists and voice actors have passed on. I have this fantasy of getting writers and story editors from 84, 85, 86 to do, a 5-part miniseries. Just using the Russ Heath model sheets and doing the season that we didn't have. It's like, I want to see a 1988 season, after the movie.
I thought you were going to talk to the comic books, that can we get back some of those stellar teams and have maybe a 1, 2, 3 of Rod Wiggum, Ron Wagner, Mark Bright, something like that, just as a little sort of sub mini arc within the book. That would be pretty incredible.
That is also a fantasy of mine. There's some things working against that. Herb Trimpe drew a bunch of covers. Wiggum drew a bunch of covers. Bright did this. I'm going to take credit for this, actually. Mark Bright drew an issue of Transformers at the beginning of IDW's run with those characters. I saw Chris Ryle, then later editor-in-chief at IDW, at, I guess it was BotCon, might have been JoeCon, and they were going to do a bunch of one-shots, character one-shots, the spotlights, and Mark Bright drew 2 or 3 covers for Transformers at the beginning of the Marvel run, and he painted the famous Shockwave Transformers Are All Dead cover. And like, this fact is not obscure, but I feel like a lot of people don't know it, even though you can see his signature. It's hard, but you can see it by Shockwave's feet. And I said to Chris Ryle, Mark Bright never drew any interiors for the series. You should hire him to do something. And he said, that's a good idea. So Mark Bright drew the first Transformers spotlight. In terms of IDW hiring artists from the past, comics don't pay very well.
Yeah,
and
that's what it falls
smaller
down,
publishers,
isn't it?
the page rate at the smaller publishers, it's not what it should be. Page rates haven't gone up a lot in 20 or 30 years. And I can't speak for any one artist in particular, but editors are juggling a budget, got to pay for the penciler and the writer and the letterer and all this stuff. And sometimes if you're going to spend a little extra money on an issue, you get it on a cover artist or a variant cover artist. It's possible, some of these artists have been asked and there's no time in their schedule. An editor may not want to go overboard with finding folks. The argument is that it's Larry. Larry's here, so it's not like we're living in the past because he's on the book. But I would love it if some of these guys, all these guys, the yearbook with the Crimson Guardsmen on the cover, and those 1 or 2 fill-in issues by Ron Frenz and Sergio Corelio were really exciting because those are guys who might have drawn G.I. Joe at Marvel at the time. But, Frenz was drawing like Thor, and I think Corelio was at DC doing Green Arrow, I forget. And they very much fit in this, Ron Wagner, Rod Wiggum, Herb Trimpe world, this, Marvel DC house style of the 70s and 80s, which I mean as a compliment. The shorthand is like old school, but I feel like sometimes old school can come across as an insult.
Sure.
There's a change with Mark Bright because there's a little more superhero in his art. There's a change with Andrew Wildman because there's a little more animation in his art. And then there's a change halfway through Andrew Wildman's run because he starts drawing 2 books per month and his inker changes.
Okay.
Like Phil Gosier for the final year of G.I. Joe has different influences than the people who came before him, and the book looks different. And then on top of it, like Scarlett's like sort of super heroic ninja costume.
Yeah, it's not my favorite era of the book, the last 20 or so issues. But
I really love issue 145, Gosier's first issue, like after Ninja Force. That issue, we're back in, is it Barovia, and Cobra Commander's a bad guy. That issue felt like a really good shift. Yeah. And interviewing, sorry, I don't know if it's Gosier or Gosier, but interviewing Phil a couple years ago was really exciting because he enjoyed doing that book, and he, it gave him a leg up in comics, even if, it was just a toy book and the book got canceled. And it's great to talk to these artists, and, I try to be a journalist for 30 or 90 minutes and then I'll take off my hat for a moment and say, also, as a fan, it's really cool to talk to you. I love your issues. Yeah,
for sure. I think as much as anything, those last few issues, it was kind of the inconsistency in the team rather than necessarily a dislike for one particular artist, although subjectively there were sort of styles of art there that I preferred more than others, but yeah, I can appreciate his style for what it is, and at the very least, the stories did come across, and the storytelling ability was there, even if the slightly more exaggerated cartoony stuff was a fairly stark deviation from the slightly more realistic portrayals that come before.
And then he went on to draw Steel, which is where
Okay.
Chris Batista had gone. So I was looking through the back issues at my store, and I found John Stadema's issue and a half of like Adventures of Superman. And I forget if he did this before or after G.I. Joe, but it's right around then. And at the time, I didn't like his issues, but I got a commission from him 2 years ago. I had him draw a big G.I. Joe scene for me.
Oh, interesting.
And it's awesome. And he last year was posting sketches every couple of days on Facebook, and some of it's cartooning and some of it's more grounded. And I don't know if he's still like a good fit for like the monthly grind of comics, but whoever the inker, himself, someone like Brian Shearer, it'd be so cool for him to do even a backup story. But one of the things I'd love, I want IDW to go bi-weekly again on G.I. Joe. It was so cool when Silent Option was running, because there were 2 G.I. Joe stories in this canon happening every month. And then, during the 220s when it was going bi-weekly. And I feel like, you could either just have double the issues, or you could have a mini series or some one-shots on the side. And maybe that's the place for some return artists. And they're also, if they're not under contract at other publishers, there are also tons of artists who are newer to comics who I would love to see. Not the Paul Allor continuity or the sort of the Transformers shared universe IDW continuity. There are tons of other people who have maybe just done covers. I'd love them to do a full issue.
Like Ryan Kelly, for example, just sort of has talked about working on G.I. Joe being a bit of a career ambition just because of his love for the franchise, and that while he's gotten to work on the Paul Allor continuity, it's not quite the same as the old Hammerverse and being on the main book.
Tom Waltz, are you listening? There are some artists who should draw a 20-page Larry Hama G.I. Joe story. It could be an annual or a backup. I'd rather it not be a backup, but I'll take anything.
You'll take anything at this point.
It could just be the next issue, like no offense to the two, to Atkins and Diaz, but just slot them into just the middle of a story.
But I feel like I've taken up an awful lot of your time.
I feel like I've taken up an awful lot of your listeners' time.
It's been a good meandering talk. Sort of covering a lot of areas, a lot of bits of property, and a lot and some good insight into how you're progressing with your book, particularly. But as much as you might be modest and do down some of your expertise, it's clear from this chat that you are the guy who knows your G.I. Joe stuff. And definitely, it's every day is a school day when I am listening to you, learning new stuff. So thank you very much for spending some time with us, and I found it fascinating, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again at some point in the future.
Sure, I'm always ready to talk G.I. Joe. And to your listeners, if you are in Massachusetts, if you're near Boston, we're a mile out of Boston, please visit Hub Comics, my brick and mortar shop. We are closed for the time being for renovations, and also to just avoid some of the COVID complications of having a business. But there are updates every week on our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/hubcomics, our website, hubcomics.com. You can find me on Instagram at A Real American Book. My website is arealamericanbook.com. It's been running for years, so if you have just recently found it, the index page, it's not the easiest to navigate, but between comics and toys and animation and anecdotes, there's a wealth of posts from the last couple of years, and I hope to see you all on the internet soon. Thank you again so much, Mark, and to your Talking Joe's listeners for having me.
Thank you, our pleasure, because when all's said and done, you can catch us down the road, because we've been Talking Joe, and we're all out of Joes.
That's great.